What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to take a look at Immortals of Aveum. Not that old of a game, right? Sometimes we do games that are like 20 years old on this channel. Sometimes we do games that are less than a year old. But, you know, I skipped out on this game, and this was a game that actually has quite a bit of history, even though it did only come out, last year. So I want to talk a little bit about it, and primarily pushed by it being on PlayStation Plus. So a big talking point with this game was always, and it probably was always going to be, is it worth full price, right? This game comes out, I believe, last August, drops around the same time as Baldur's Gate 3 when it came out on PC, and it unleashes itself, for a full $70, okay? Full price game. And I mean, it's asking a lot. I mean, money is different to each person. The value of a game and the amount of time and how good the game is, the value is going to change depending on what person you are. But $70 is a big ask, and it's also a big ask for a brand new IP. This is a new IP. The game didn't do well. The studio, I believe, got cut down into half of its, original size. They had to lay off about half the team. And I believe the word was because they created this game, they're now going to probably be more of like a support team versus getting the opportunity to make like their own game, which is quite the punishment. I mean, basically, it's the game failed, and so the studio suffered, because of it. All right, well, number one, was the game that bad? And number two, is the game worth it now that it's free? The game is out on PlayStation Plus right now, and you can play it for nothing. Now, I will be honest and say that's what I did. It also didn't help them that at the time this game came out, it comes out, it doesn't do well, it doesn't sell well. It gets, I think, like in the low to mid 60s on Metacritic. So nothing is like amazing about this game, right? And within a few months, they're talking, the head of the studio that made this game talked and said that he was working out deals to get this game on Game Pass and on PlayStation Plus. So for me, now I'm chronically online, but for me who is online, I see that the head of the studio is trying to get his game on subscription services, which means you wouldn't pay for it. And that's only a couple months after the game came out, and I was thinking, okay, well, why would I buy it? Even over Black Friday for like a sale, why would you do that? And ultimately, I didn't do it, and I just kind of patiently waited. Now, it's been far enough into this video to say, I actually think this game is fine. At a time in this game, I wanted to say this game was good. And I would say a few hours in, maybe like 2.5 hours in, I was texting people. I was saying it out loud in my house where nobody cares. And I was saying, this is a highly underrated game. What in God's name were people thinking? Giving this game 6s, thinking it's okay. This game is epic. This game is awesome. I legitimately felt that for the first couple hours. Now, the game catches up to itself, and there are plenty of things in this game that bring it down. I ultimately think this is a good first attempt. It reminds me, maybe it's not as good. Maybe I like this game I'm about to say more, but it does kind of remind me of Days Gone. Now, Days Gone made more money. Okay, I mean, just flat out. It sold really well, and they still didn't make more of them. PlayStation shot the pitch for Days Gone 2 down, right? This game comes out, now it doesn't sell, and I personally believe it's not as good as Days Gone. I think Days Gone was a higher starting point than this game. But this is still a pretty good example of a game that just kind of it just needs more. You need to almost allow them to continue. And I get it. The game doesn't sell well. And maybe the franchise, like you look at the IP and you say, Immortals of Aveum, like, does that mean something to anybody? And if it doesn't, then you really can't make sequels, okay? Like, I do understand shutting down a franchise, okay? Or a would-be franchise, a franchise that wants to become one. But at the same time, this is a classic example. We always talk on this channel, I've talked on my other channels, back in the PS3 360 era, I think this game actually would have succeeded quite well, because that was an era of experimentation. That was an era where games didn't cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and you could have a game that does so-so, and you could legitimately make it a franchise, because you just need a starting point, and that's what this is to this game. Okay, so let's break it down a little bit. What's good about it? What's not good about it? Well, ultimately, let me answer the question I posed at the beginning first. Let me just get out of the way. Is it worth $0? Is it worth your time to play this game, to try it on PS Plus? Yes. Yes, it is. I enjoyed it to an extent, and there are, again, things that brought it down, but is it worth free? It absolutely is. Was it worth $70? It's very hard for me to judge that because I didn't play it when it was $70, so obviously, like, I'm kind of skewed. I don't think I would have been all that thrilled myself spending $70 on this game, okay? I think it's an okay starting point. I think they got some things that would work in future titles, and I do like elements. I think some elements in this game are legitimately good. Some elements are not. Some elements kind of balance it out, right? Making it overall an okay game. You know, the first couple hours, oh my God, this is a great, amazing game. Then I was like, okay, yeah, this feels like a 6 out of 10. This is maybe the most 6 out of 10 game that you can find out there right now. Like, it just feels okay. And there's nothing too wrong with that. Some games do that. Some games need to start there to, again, do better later on. But in today's economy, in today's gaming landscape, can you be just a borderline okay game on your first attempt and charge $70 and expect people to back that, to support that? Obviously not. Obviously it's been proven that you can't really do that, okay? All right, let's start with just the eye test, okay, the visuals. How are the visuals? This game can look downright gorgeous at times. I don't know if it's patched in yet, but they were doing some like new kind of technology with the PS5, adding in some update. I got to be real with you. I'm not a big technology guy. I don't know what it does or what it would do, but the game does look really good. And there's a couple very CG looking moments. Now, granted, they do not last long. In fact, there's one CG moment that maybe lasts about like 10 to 15 seconds. And I was like, why'd they even put that in if they're immediately going to change it to a different kind of cutscene? But the faces do look really good. The visuals do look largely. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes I think that catches up to it because you almost sacrifice the performance at times. There are times, even in cutscenes, where the thing drags. I'm not a big frame rate guy. I'm also not a big like 4K versus really the visuals to me are almost dead last. Now I appreciate good visuals, and we've talked about visuals before, but I would prefer the gameplay. I'd prefer maybe even the story and characters. So for this game, the visuals do overwhelmingly look really good. There are times, though, where some things will look excellent, and then sometimes in the environment, it'll look not so good. Sometimes you'll see their faces, and it looks really good, but the camera will move, or it's just a higher tempo scene, and it doesn't seem to catch up. Like, they're not even firing their spells all that fast, but sometimes if it's a cutscene where they are battling each other, sometimes it drags. You can see the frame rate drop before your eyes. And again, I'm honestly not a big frame rate person. The 30 versus 60 thing is obviously a big thing online, and people have legitimate feelings about that, and that's totally fine. For me, I don't really care too much as long as the game doesn't drop mid. Like, whatever it starts at is fine by me as long as it stays there, and this game does not do it. So right there is the first thing we're talking about is kind of the example that you're going to see often with everything else that I say. Visuals can most of the time look really good, but sometimes it kind of breaks down. The characters, there's some of them that are actually pretty darn good. Some of them are not good almost at all. The main character of Jack, okay? I heard a lot about him, okay, leading into this game, and I didn't want my bias to rub off, right? Because I heard a lot of his lines, or some of his lines at least, can be pretty cringy, or some of the lines in general in this game can be pretty cringy. Now, the second part I do think is true. Jack, I actually think, is maybe by miles the best character in this game. Maybe like Sandrax, which is the villain. I really like him. But I would actually say Jack, like, he does have some lines that are so-so, but I think the performance is genuine. I think his character is genuine. This is kind of that classic tale of a character that doesn't really want to be there and is kind of thrust into this role that is now in that role. Does that make sense? That's at least how it starts, right? He's not this military kind of man, and yet he kind of has to, and he kind of grows into it, but he's got some spunk, he's got some comedy to him, he's not just always serious, and he sometimes sees things in a different way than, say, like his commanders, and I like that. I think, again, it's a genuine, like, acting performance from him, even if some of the lines don't come through. Like I said, Sandrax as the main villain, I like him. I think they did something kind of really weird at the end. Like, they tried to change up who he was and what side he was kind of playing for, and then they kind of reversed it again. I don't want to spoil it, so I don't want to get too far into it, but they did some weird stuff with his character, but I always felt he was kind of genuine. And then you kind of go down the line. I think of somebody like Devin when I think of the cringe, but also Devin is a character that I think can actually be quite likable because you can sometimes talk to characters in between missions. You can do a couple things in between missions. He's a character that I think can be good, but then he also has some downright awful lines, and I would even say not great performance of those lines. Another character is Luna, who I would say probably the exact same thing. She can be likable. She can be a good character. Her relationship with Jack is an interesting one. There's one line where she talks about free tuition in schools. I don't want to make this political. I mean, trust me. Number one, I do have student loans, so I can kind of relate. I mean, would free tuition be nice? It probably would. But anyway, it just absolutely didn't need to be in there. She mentions it. It's part of a different subject. It felt like a writer thought they could make a really witty joke and maybe even connect it to current, should you pay for college or not? And I don't care. I don't care your opinion on it. We're not here to talk about that. And I just don't know why she said that. But that's just one example. She has a couple lines. That's the worst one. But she has a couple lines where it's you don't need to say that, or you don't need to act like that. She acts kind of weird throughout the game. And it's nah, I like you sometimes, but other times I really don't like you. So I would honestly say quite a few of the characters are like that. Again, there's a few that stand out, and there's a few that are probably more good than bad, but then there's a couple that are kind of 50-50, and I just kind of wanted to highlight some of that. Okay, well, what about the gameplay? Well, that's what you're going to be doing most of this game, isn't it? The gameplay. Now, it's an interesting one because it is the game's greatest strength. It is the game's greatest strength. The story goes up and down, and we'll talk about that probably last. I want to get it. Gameplay is so important to this game. For the gameplay itself, I think they actually have something there. And this is probably the case where, I mentioned you need a starting point. You need a point where you can then do better things, for the sequel. This is it. Because the magic spells, I don't want to compare it to Doom. I want to try to explain how this game actually even works with the gameplay, but you actually can't put it in a box. And I find that both a good and a bad thing because the game seemingly was pitched to us, or at least I saw journalists pitch it as this is kind of Doom but with magic. Did you see that? I saw it leading into the release. This is Doom but with magic. You walk into an area and it's a wide open kind of battlefield, and there's different terrain levels, and you can switch different weapons, and some weapons will be more effective on some enemies versus others. You'll face them. You might face a boss, and that boss becomes kind of like mini bosses throughout the game. It does have elements of Doom, but it was pitched to us almost exclusively as Doom. Okay, well, what I just said. It definitely at times feels like Doom, but also at times it just feels like a first-person magic shooter. It doesn't really feel like it's trying to copy anything specific. Now, the story has elements of Final Fantasy VII with the life stream. This has The Wound, and honestly, they're very close. They're actually shockingly close, okay? And maybe it's because I just played Final Fantasy a month ago, but also in terms of the life stream and how the planet gives and receives, this game is the exact same. The planet is basically alive. There's a little bit more terminology. There's a little bit more ancient history, I guess, with that. But overall, the general idea is actually shockingly similar. There's a lasso that you can use to traverse sometimes. That actually felt very much like BioShock Infinite when you're doing the rails. But then also when you're lashing people, at times it actually felt like Bulletstorm. And I would say the speed at which you're shooting reminded me probably more of Bulletstorm. Not necessarily as fun. I think Bulletstorm is one of the most fun shooters in existence. Not as fun. Not that it's no fun at all, but it's just not as fun. It reminded me more of Bulletstorm, I would say, than Doom. But it's got a little Doom. The movement's got a little BioShock in it. The story's got a little Final Fantasy in it. It is a combination of, I guess, a couple different things. It does try to do its own thing. Okay, so how the game is basically broken down is missions, and the game is pretty short. The game is roughly, maybe 8 to 10 hours. You can go around and you can unlock chests and do kind of puzzles, which normally is just turning things and shooting them at the right time, or aiming laser beams into eyes, which will unlock a door. There's a couple, not mini games, but things you would do with the core mechanics of this game, okay? But the base game is about 8 to 10 hours, which is, a little bit short as well. I didn't mind it. I actually felt the game overstayed its welcome at times, so I think it may have even needed to be shorter. But the structure is mission, Then you talk to people, you can forge things, you can upgrade things, and then you do the next mission, right? And again, like, the worlds are kind of big. The map reminds me of Jedi Survivor, where it's kind of like three-dimensional, but it's also kind of hard to understand where you are in the map. It reminded me a lot of it. But again, you can go off the beaten path and unlock some things. But generally, I didn't do much exploring. I did a little. And there's a couple side things you can do in the game, kind of challenges or runs. But for the most part, I stuck just with the story, and I never felt like I was massively underleveled, underpowered. It just depends on what weapons. You have to use the right weapons, for a specific enemy. So the actual shooting itself, again, I actually do think is quite fun. You have the 3 different types of, let's say, guns or magic abilities. You'll level them up. And I kind of want to stop there because I actually think right there, core-wise, is very good. I think it is fun to aim and shoot, and you could see it, from probably the B-roll that I'm throwing in here. I think it is largely fun. There's enough enemy variety, not too much. It's not like Doom level, but it's there. There's enough of it where you can experiment, and you'll have to kind of stay on your toes and say, okay, it's this kind of enemy. I have to use this weapon, etc. That's in there. So that, in and of itself is good. Where I think the game kind of falls apart a little bit is in 2 different areas. Number 1 is the actual more like RPG elements where you actually can change your gear. You can have like rings. The weapons that you have specifically, there's levels to them. So you'll start at level 1, you'll unlock level 5s and 9s, and eventually you can get to like 20s and 35s, and they're like epic. And, they got the color scheme, epic, rare, things like that. I don't feel that was necessary at all for this game. There is, again, the ability tree where you have the 3 different colors, green, blue, red, and you pick, and I kind of went even. I kind of went exactly the same for each 3 so that they're all equally powerful because, again, you'll be facing enemies at the end where you'll need red, then you'll need green, then you'll need blue, like on a dime, and you'll have to be able to do it. So I didn't want to overload one ability or one power, okay? I think that's fine. It's ability tree. A lot of games have ability trees, and I think that works out rather well. The gear system, I didn't hate it. I am a man of numbers. I do like numbers, so when I see that I get like a level 35, my eyes glitter a little bit, and I say, ooh, a level 35. But overall, I just don't think the game needed that kind of element. I kind of felt that took away from just the base game. Also, I mentioned, I think the game overstays its welcome. It overstays its welcome in 2 areas, the story and the gameplay, because I mentioned Doom in the element, like, what is one thing you think of when you think of Doom? An enemy that's kind of a boss becoming a reoccurring enemy down the line, right? They throw it in the rotation, and I think that makes Doom so good. I mean, it's the speed, it's the level design, but it's also the combination they give you of enemies and how they cycle through them, and how, again, an enemy that is at one point very strong will just kind of become almost a mini boss, and there'll be a new boss later on in the game. This game tries that, and I think it does it not so well. There's a couple enemies in the game that are annoying. They're annoying to fight, and then as the game goes, they will give you 2 or 3 of them to fight because now they're normal enemies, and they won't have boss level health, but they also will not have grunt level health. Does that make sense? And hopefully I can find some video that can show you what I mean as well, but there's a couple where they're like blue magni, like kind of a magic wielders, and some of them are like anytime you face off against them, whether they're red, green, or blue, they're kind of difficult. And you'll face them again as a boss, or almost like a celestial, like a really big, this thing that'll shoot like a beam out of its face. They're pretty tough. Okay, let me rephrase that. They're not hard to figure out the pattern. They're just long. They take a long time to take down. And eventually, you might have to take out 2 of them or 3 of them while also maybe fighting other enemies. And it's like, again, like that is a system. That is something that games do. But they feel too grindy. They're not impactful enough. They're not fun enough. I think when this game is at its best is actually when they're throwing a lot of lower level enemies at you. And I mean, you can call me whatever you want in terms of like skill level. I think I was quite good at this game. I died, but I didn't die too much. And I kind of died primarily because enemies do a lot of damage to you. You could take 3 hits from an enemy and die. And I would say even a lower enemy, you could take a couple hits and die. So you have to constantly be managing your health. You have to constantly be using your special abilities, which are very cool. You got a couple of them. Very, very cool. But ultimately, the game's at its most fun When the enemies are not too challenging, they're moving around a lot, you're moving around a lot. When the enemies are more like baggy and they're like heavy, they last too long, they're just around for too long, you know what I mean? And I mean, you could say, well, Alex, maybe you weren't leveled up enough. The game did get a little easier as it went, like as I started to get more and more powerful. But in order to get more and more powerful, like I unlocked maybe 35 skills out of 95. So I did maybe a little bit more than a third of the abilities. And I mean, I did a casual run. I did do some extra stuff, but I didn't do a lot of it. So I guess if you do 100% this game, you might have an easier time. And then, yeah, maybe enemies aren't so grindy. But I never felt, like I said, I never felt under-leveled. I almost felt like some of these enemies are supposed to be that long or that hard to take down. And again, if they're bosses, I think that's fine. And some of the bosses in this game are actually quite good. Sandrax actually is very good. But like when you recycle them, especially the not fun ones, they're still not fun. Now there's more of them, and now you're dealing with just more things happening at one time. It's not great. And I could really say the same thing with the story. The story started really good and kind of really fast and actually even a little emotional. Then you start to get introduced to the world, and I was like, oh, this is a little Final Fantasy. You know, these characters aren't too bad. Like, they're pretty okay. The middle part of this game, I actually texted people this or said this out loud to people on Party Chat. I don't know why games have such a hard time with them. I mean, okay, I do actually. Like, when you come up with an idea, the beginning of it is probably good and the ending of it's pretty good, but you need that middle part to connect them, and that can be quite hard, right? The thing that's a little upsetting is this is a short game, okay? There's 18 chapters, but chapters are only around half an hour each, right? So about 9 hours, right? The game's not that long. And so when your middle part struggles and kind of drags on, not as big of an excuse. You don't have an excuse compared to, say, a game. What about a game that story is 35 hours? Well, maybe you'll have like 5 hours in the middle that just kind of feel not great, but you're telling a 35-hour story. This game tells a 9-hour story. The ending is pretty good. The ending couple chapters are pretty good. The beginning is really good. The middle kind of felt like a MacGuffin. I think that would probably be the right phrase, where it's just go here, learn about this, then turn around, go there. We know you were just at this place, now go back to that place. It felt too much like that, where important, impactful things were just not really happening. Even character interactions weren't really there. There wasn't anything really pushing it. For a good couple chapters, and couple means two in my mind, more than a couple. I'd say maybe a good 3, 4, 5 chapters in that middle. Did it need to happen? I mean, there was some stuff that literally happened in the story, but I don't know. I feel like you could have condensed it in a weird way. And I say this, I know what I'm saying. So I said, I guess kind of like unironically, the game could have been shorter. I know, like, when you pitch an idea of people on a single-player 9-hour shooter game that's a brand new IP that's kind of middling and it's $70, I get the pushback. And then I also get the pushback if you say, okay, well, what if it's now 6 hours instead of 9 hours or 10 hours? I mean, I get how people would be, a little concerned. But for me personally, I actually think this game would have done quite well. And I do actually believe there was talk, maybe even just a month or two ago, there's kind of rumors of the budget ballooned to like over $100 million. And a person, I don't know if they're still there or if they left, but I remember reading something where they said it was less ambitious, like it was kind of smaller in scope and it became bigger. I actually would like to have seen that game, because the story, I mean, at times it can be ambitious, but there were just some times where I don't really think it was necessary. I think you could have pulled that back. You could have put this thing out there and been a 5, 6, 7-hour game. I bet you it would have been better. I truly believe that. Now, is it a harder sell? Absolutely. Did they probably know that, EA, and said, you can't have a 5-hour shooter? You know what I mean? You need to push this thing. I'm sure they did. And this is ultimately what happens when you push it, right? Like, the game needs to be the length that the game needs to be. And I think the game needs to be a little bit shorter. And to wrap this up, it is a little, not maybe disappointing, but I think the entire situation, I would have liked it to have been a success story. Like, EA's done some really bad stuff, and they've said some really bad stuff over the, in the past. But really, I mean, not sports-wise and probably not even Battlefield-wise, but they have turned a corner maybe in the last 5, 6 years, right? They really have. And one of the things I think they've been so good at is even their EA Originals, which this is literally under the banner of like EA Originals, right? But you think to Joseph Fares, right, with A Way Out, which, oh my God, I love A Way Out, and maybe we'll do that on this channel eventually. What about It Takes Two? Now, same guy, same studio, but EA has found a really good way. Even Unravel. Unravel is a good example, right? They've had a good string of these EA originals that tend to be smaller in budget, and I guess that's probably the problem, right? They tend to be smaller. This one is an EA original that's normally more like indie kind of scene, or it feels indie, and then this game is literally trying to be this huge, epic scale first-person shooter, but with magic. And it's ambitious, and if they pulled it back a little bit, you know what I mean? I don't know whose decision ultimately that may have been, but I think the game kind of gets in its own way at times, right? But, overall, I'm glad I played it. I am, because I think the story overall was fine. It had some moments where it wasn't very good, but I think it ended pretty okay. I like the overall concept of how magic works and how magic wielders work in this world. I like it. I think the core gameplay is actually quite good. It got a little repetitive with enemies and recycling them, and again, some of the mechanics of how they recycle enemies got in their own way again. But overall, I think this was a solid first attempt, and I think they should be allowed to make more. I think Immortals of Aveum 2 would probably be a better game. You know what I mean? It probably would be where people would start to pay attention to it more. Again, I get it. This game didn't sell well. It was full price. If you're going to do it again, you have to go even bigger, so that's even more money. And then if the game doesn't sell, you know what I mean? You're going to lose even more money. So I get not doing it, but it's a little tragic, isn't it? Because I think these kind of games, I truly believe this game would have worked 15 years ago. If this game came out between 2007 to 2010, somewhere in that range, when the Resistances of the world were going on, or Gears, or even Halo was still, if it came out then, I think it actually would have done quite well. So that's my end thoughts on it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.